It's strange how a single moment can change the course of your life. For me, that moment happened on an ordinary, rainy afternoon. I wasn't expecting anything remarkable, just another day, another failure to confront the one thing that had haunted me for years, my inability to speak English. You see, English had always been my weakness. Every time someone spoke to me in English, my heart would race, my palms would sweat, and my mind would go completely blank. It wasn't just about the language, it was about the shame of not knowing it. I felt trapped, isolated in a world where English was everywhere, yet I couldn't reach it. I had tried everything: classes, grammar books, even apps that promised to make me fluent in 30 days. But nothing worked. The words refused to stick, the sentences felt robotic, and the embarrassment of making mistakes was unbearable. I began to believe that I was simply not cut out for it. But then, on that rainy afternoon, something extraordinary happened. I was cleaning out the attic of my old childhood home, a task I had been avoiding for months. The room smelled of dust and forgotten memories, with boxes piled high and cobwebs clinging to the corners. As I rummaged through old belongings, my hand brushed against a small wooden chest. Its surface was worn, the paint chipped, and it had an antique lock that creaked as I opened it. Inside, there were few books, an old diary, and a single cassette tape. The tape was labeled in faded handwriting, "The Secret to Fluency." For a moment, I just stared at it. The title felt almost magical, like it was meant for me to find. Who had left this here?
And why?
I didn't know, but something about it called to me. I rushed downstairs, grabbed an old cassette player from the storage room, and pressed play. The tape crackled to life, and a calm, soothing voice began to speak. If you're struggling to learn English, know this. Fluency isn't about perfection. It's about finding your rhythm. It's about persistence, creativity, and the courage to embrace your mistakes. The voice continued, sharing a story about someone who had learned English by immersing themselves in tiny, everyday moments, narrating their actions, listening to stories, and connecting with the language in a way that felt natural. I was captivated. This wasn't like anything I had heard before. It wasn't about grammar rules or endless drills. It was about finding a rhythm, a flow, a connection. That night, I couldn't sleep. The voice on the tape kept replaying in my mind. Fluency isn't about perfection. It's about rhythm. What did that mean? Was it as simple as speaking aloud? Or was it something deeper? The next morning, I decided to take the first step. I picked up an old English storybook that had been sitting on my shelf for years. The sentences were basic, almost childish. The cat is on the mat. The sun is shining. I began reading them aloud. My voice trembled, and I stumbled over words, but I kept going. Each sentence felt like a small victory. By the end of the page, I realized something important. I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to try. Encouraged, I listened to the tape again. The voice suggested another technique. Speak to yourself. Narrate your actions in English. Even if it feels silly, do it consistently. The more you use the language, the more it will become a part of you. So I tried. As I brushed my teeth, I mumbled, "I am brushing my teeth." Now I am washing my face. When I cooked breakfast, I whispered, "I am cracking the eggs." The eggs are yellow. At first, it felt ridiculous, but after a few days, it became second nature. Over the next week, I added more to my routine. I found simple English songs online and sang along, even if I didn't understand all the words. I downloaded short podcasts for beginners and repeated sentences after the speakers. Each step felt small, but together, they began to form a rhythm, a flow that I could feel growing stronger every day. But my journey wasn't without challenges. One evening, emboldened by my progress, I decided to test myself by watching an English movie without subtitles. I chose a lighthearted comedy, thinking it would be easy to follow. But within minutes, I was completely lost. The dialogue was too fast, the slang unfamiliar, the jokes incomprehensible. Frustration bubbled up inside me, and I turned the movie off in anger. Maybe I'm just not good enough, I thought, tears of defeat stinging my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I felt like giving up. The fear and doubt I had fought so hard to overcome came rushing back, threatening to undo all my progress. But then, I remembered the voice on the tape. Fluency isn't about being perfect, it's about being persistent. Mistakes are not failures, they are lessons. The words felt like a lifeline. The next day, I changed my approach. Instead of watching an entire movie, I focused on a single scene. I replayed it over and over, pausing to mimic the lines. I repeated the sentences until I could say them confidently. At first, it was exhausting, but slowly, the words began to make sense. One line from the scene resonated deeply. You can't find your path if you're too afraid to walk it. Those words became my mantra. I realized that my fear of failure had been my biggest obstacle. If I wanted to succeed, I had to let go of that fear and keep moving forward, one step at a time. As my confidence grew, I started journaling in English. At first, my entries were simple. Today, I listened to a story. It was about courage. But over time, my sentences became longer, more natural. I wrote about my dreams, my fears, my goals, all in English. Then one day, something extraordinary happened. I was walking through the city when I noticed a small cafe. Its sign read, "Language Exchange Evenings. All levels welcome." My heart raced as I stood outside, debating whether to go in. What if they laughed at my mistakes? What if I embarrassed myself? But then I remembered the tape's advice. The greatest breakthroughs happen when you leave your comfort zone. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped inside. The warm aroma of coffee filled the air, and I saw a group of people gathered around a table, laughing and chatting in English. My stomach churned with nerves. Just as I was about to turn and leave, one of them looked up and smiled. "First time here?" he asked kindly. I nodded hesitantly. "Come join us," he said, pulling out a chair. And just like that, I was part of the group. As I sat down at the cafe table, surrounded by strangers speaking English fluently, my heart raced. I felt out of place, as though every word I said would expose how little I knew. But there was also a spark of excitement. I was finally stepping out of my comfort zone. The man who invited me, James, introduced himself and gestured to the others. "Don't worry," he said, smiling warmly. "We all started somewhere. This is a safe space." The group began discussing books, travel, and life experiences. I sat quietly, trying to follow the conversation. At one point, James turned to me and asked, "So, what's your favorite book?" I froze. My mind went blank. I could feel the eyes of the group on me. The words were there, buried somewhere, but they refused to come out. After a long pause, I managed to stammer, like Harry Potter." The group smiled encouragingly, and James said, "Great choice. What's your favorite part?" I hesitated again, searching for the words. The part where Harry fights the bad guy," I said, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. Instead of laughing, they nodded and asked more questions. Slowly, I started to relax. The fear of making mistakes began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of belonging. That evening, as I walked home, I felt a mix of pride and determination. It wasn't perfect, but I had done it. I had spoken English with real people. For the first time, I realized that fluency wasn't about never making mistakes. It was about having the courage to communicate, to connect, and to keep trying. From that day on, the cafe became my second home. I joined their weekly language exchange meetings, and with every conversation, I grew more confident. The group encouraged me to speak freely, correcting my mistakes gently and celebrating my progress. One evening, James handed me a small notebook. On the cover, he had written, "Your journey to fluency." Inside, there were prompts like, "Describe your happiest memory. Write about a place you want to visit and why." He explained, writing helps organize your thoughts in English. Use this notebook to express yourself. Don't worry about grammar, just write. I started using the notebook every day. At first, my sentences were simple. Today was a good day. I went to the cafe. But as time passed, my entries became more detailed and personal. I wrote about my fears, my dreams, and my struggles. Writing became a safe space where I could experiment with the language and reflect on my journey. One day, James suggested something that terrified me. Why don't you give a short presentation at our next meeting? I stared at him in disbelief. Me? Speak in front of everyone? I can't. You can, he said confidently. You've made so much progress. It's time to take the next step. Over the next week, I prepared tirelessly. I wrote and rewrote my speech, practiced in front of the mirror, and even recorded myself speaking. The day of the presentation, my hands trembled as I stood before the group. When I started learning English, I began, my voice shaking. I thought it was impossible. But I learned that fluency isn't about being perfect. It's about connection. It's about trying, failing, and trying again. As I spoke, I saw nods of encouragement from the group. By the time I finished, the room erupted in applause. Tears filled my eyes as I realized something profound. I was no longer just learning English. I was living it. The cafe meetings became more than just practice sessions. They became a family. We supported each other, shared our stories, and celebrated our victories. I started to use English outside the cafe too. I ordered food in restaurants, asked for directions, and even helped a tourist navigate the city. Each interaction felt like a small triumph, a reminder of how far I had come. One day, I decided to revisit the cassette tape that had started it all. As I played it, the voice said something that resonated deeply. The secret to fluency isn't in books or rules. It's in the connections you make. Language is a bridge, not a barrier. Use it to reach others, and you'll find your voice. I finally understood what the voice meant. Fluency wasn't about mastering every word or rule. It was about using the language to express myself, to connect, and to grow. Months later, James surprised me with an idea. Let's organize a storytelling event at the cafe, he said. You should share your journey. It will inspire others. The thought of standing in front of a crowd was terrifying, but I knew it was the next step. I spent weeks preparing my story, reflecting on every struggle and victory. On the day of the event, the cafe was packed. As I stood on the small stage, I took a deep breath and began. When I found an old cassette tape labeled "The Secret to Fluency," I didn't know it would change my life. But it did. It taught me that fluency isn't about being perfect, it's about being brave. It's about finding your rhythm, embracing your mistakes, and connecting with the world around you. The audience listened intently, and when I finished, they erupted into applause. People came up to me afterward, sharing their own struggles and thanking me for inspiring them. Looking back, I realized that the secret wasn't just in the tape or the cafe. It was in the journey itself. It was in the moments of doubt and determination, the connections I made, and the courage to keep going. Fluency wasn't just about learning English, it was about finding myself. And that's a journey I'll carry with me forever.